What if I told you that one of the most promising deals in Southeast Asian history turned into a complete disaster and nobody saw it coming? Malaysia, a country with big dreams, massive ambitions, and a hunger to become the next economic powerhouse, made a decision that would change everything, but not in the way they expected. Picture this. The year is 2017 and Malaysia's leaders are standing on stage shaking hands with some of the biggest names in global business. Cameras are flashing, headlines are celebrating, and the entire nation is filled with hope because they were promised something incredible. Billions of dollars in investment, thousands of high-paying jobs, cutting-edge technology transfer, and a future where Malaysia would stand shoulder to shoulder with the world's most developed economies. Sounds amazing, right? But here is the question. Nobody was asking, what were they giving up in return? What was hidden in the fine print that everyone was too excited to read? You see, Malaysia wasn't just entering a business deal, they were gambling their future on promises made by people who had no obligation to keep them, and by the time they realized what was really happening, it was already too late. Now, to understand how Malaysia ended up in this situation, we need to go back and look at what was really going on in the country during this time. You see, Malaysia had always been an ambitious nation. They had built Petronas towers, they had created their own car industry, they had transformed from an agricultural economy into a manufacturing hub, so they knew how to dream big and make things happen right. But here is the thing, by the mid-2010s, something was changing. The economy was slowing down. Young Malaysians were struggling to find good jobs, and the government was under immense pressure to deliver results. Can you imagine being a leader in that situation, where your people are demanding progress, where neighboring countries like Singapore are racing ahead, and where you desperately need a win to show that you are still capable of leading the nation forward? This created the perfect environment for someone to come along with a shiny offer, and that is exactly what happened. Foreign investors saw Malaysia's desperation, and they saw an opportunity, but was it an opportunity to help Malaysia grow, or was it an opportunity to take advantage of a nation that wanted to believe so badly that they stopped asking the right questions? The answer to that question is, what makes this story so shocking and so important for every developing nation to understand, because what happened to Malaysia could happen to anyone who lets hope blind them to reality. Malaysia in 2016 was a country at a crossroads, and everyone could see it. The economy that had grown so rapidly for decades was now slowing down, and people were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Where are the jobs for our graduates? Why are our neighbors moving ahead while we seem stuck? You see, when a nation becomes desperate for good news, it becomes vulnerable to anyone who promises a better future. And Malaysia was exactly in that position, hungry for something to celebrate. Hungry for proof that their leaders still had a vision. But here is what nobody was thinking about at the time. When you are desperate, you stop asking the hard questions, you stop reading the fine print. You stop wondering why someone would offer you such an amazing deal. Was Malaysia really a land of opportunity for foreign investors, or were they simply a target waiting to be exploited by people who knew exactly how to take advantage of a nation's hopes and dreams? Now imagine you are a massive international corporation looking for your next big market, and you see Southeast Asia with its 600 million people, its growing middle class, and its governments competing against each other to attract your investment. What would you do? You would play them against each other, right? And that is exactly what started happening in the region. Indonesia was offering incentives, Thailand was rolling out the red carpet, Vietnam was promising cheap labor, and Malaysia was desperate to stand out from the crowd. So when powerful investors came knocking, Malaysian leaders did not ask why us, they asked how fast can we sign the deal. Can you see how dangerous this situation was becoming? A country so eager to win that they forgot to protect themselves. A government so focused on making announcements that they ignored the warnings from their own experts. The players had arrived, and Malaysia was ready to give them everything they wanted. But at what cost? The day the deal was announced felt like a national holiday, and I am not exaggerating. Television cameras were everywhere, newspapers ran front-page stories with massive headlines, and politicians were lining up to take credit for bringing this incredible opportunity to Malaysia. Billions of dollars in investment, that is what they promised. Thousands of jobs for young Malaysians, that is what they claimed. Technology transfer that would transform the nation into a digital powerhouse, that is what they sold to the people. But here is the question that nobody in the media was asking: where exactly was this money going to come from? And what specific guarantees were in place to ensure these promises would be kept? You see, it is easy to announce big numbers, it is easy to make people cheer, it is easy to create hope, but delivering on those promises, that is a completely different story. Malaysia was celebrating before the work had even begun, and that was their first major mistake. While the nation was busy celebrating, something very important was being ignored, and that something was the actual terms of the deal. You see, every major agreement has fine print, the detailed clauses that determine who is really protected and who is taking all the risk. And in Malaysia's case, the fine print was filled with red flags that nobody wanted to see. Vague language about timelines, meaning investors could delay forever without consequences. Exit clauses that allowed foreign companies to leave whenever they wanted with minimal penalties. Tax breaks that would cost Malaysia billions over the coming decades. But who was reading these details when the champagne was flowing? Who wanted to be the pessimist asking uncomfortable questions when everyone else was dreaming of a bright future? The experts who raised concerns were dismissed as negative thinkers, and the opposition voices were drowned out by the noise of celebration. Does this sound familiar? It should, because this pattern repeats itself in country after country. Let me break down exactly what Malaysia put on the table, because the numbers are truly shocking when you see them all together. First, there was land prime real estate in strategic locations handed over for development at prices far below market value. Then came the tax incentives. We are talking about exemptions worth billions of ringgit over 10, 15, 20 years of operation. Regulatory fast tracks were created, meaning these foreign companies could skip the normal approval processes that local businesses had to follow. And perhaps most valuable of all, access to Malaysian consumers, their data, their spending habits, their entire digital footprint. Now ask yourself this: if you were giving away so much, would you not demand ironclad guarantees in return? Would you not insist on penalties if promises were broken? Would you not protect your own people and businesses first? Malaysia did none of these things, and the question is why? Was it incompetence? Was it corruption? Or was it simply the blindness that comes from wanting something too badly? It did not take long for the cracks to appear, and those paying attention could see them within the first year. The massive headquarters that was supposed to be built was delayed indefinitely. The training programs that would skill up millions of Malaysians were quietly downsized to thousands. The jobs that were promised high-paying technical positions turned out to be mostly low-wage service roles. But here is what made the situation even worse. Whenever journalists or opposition politicians asked questions, they were told to be patient, to trust the process, to wait for the long-term benefits. Does this sound like accountability to you? When someone takes your money and asks you to just trust them, what does your gut tell you? The warning signs were everywhere, but acknowledging them would mean admitting that the celebration had been premature, and nobody in power wanted to do that. So, the problems were ignored, the concerns were dismissed, and Malaysia continued down a path that was leading nowhere good. While foreign investors were enjoying their tax breaks and special treatments, something terrible was happening too. Malaysian businesses, and nobody seemed to care. Small shop owners who had served their communities for generations suddenly found themselves competing against giants with unlimited resources. Local tech startups that had dreams of growing into major companies were crushed by foreign competitors who played by different rules. Traditional industries that employed millions of Malaysians were disrupted without any plan to help workers transition to new opportunities. Can you imagine building a business for 20 years, only to watch it destroyed because your own government gave advantages to outsiders that you could never access? This was the reality for countless Malaysian entrepreneurs, and the worst part is that their suffering was invisible because everyone was still focused on the big promises. The deal was supposed to lift all Malaysians, but instead it was drowning the very people it claimed to help. In 2018, something happened that nobody expected, and it changed everything. Malaysia held an election, and for the first time in the nation's history, the ruling party lost power. Mahathir Mohamad, a 92-year-old former prime minister, came back, and his government immediately started asking questions about every deal the previous administration had signed. Suddenly, all those agreements that were celebrated as national achievements were being examined with skeptical eyes. What did we actually agree to? Who benefited from these terms? Were there corrupt payments involved? The new government discovered what many had suspected: the deals were far more favorable to foreign investors than anyone had publicly admitted. But here is the painful truth: even when you discover you have been taken advantage of, unwinding these agreements is nearly impossible. The contracts were designed to protect the investors, not Malaysia. So what could the new government actually do? The answer is not much, and that is perhaps the most frustrating part of this entire story. As investigations continued, more and more details came to light, and each revelation was worse than the last. The investment numbers that had been announced with such fanfare turned out to include money that was never actually committed. The job creation figures had been inflated by counting positions that would have been created anyway without any special deal. The technology transfer that was supposed to transform Malaysia consisted mostly of basic systems that were already outdated. But the most damaging discovery was that similar deals had failed in other countries, and the investors knew this pattern well. They had done the same thing in Africa, in South America, in other parts of Asia. Promise big, deliver little, and leave before anyone can hold you accountable. Malaysia was not special, they were just next on the list. How does it feel to realize that your nation's hopes were part of a repeating playbook? How does it feel to know that the celebration, the pride, the excitement was all based on promises that were never meant to be kept? Behind every statistic and every failed promise, there are real human beings, whose lives were changed forever, and we cannot forget them. There is the university graduate who turned down a job abroad because she believed the promises of opportunities at home only to spend years unemployed. There is the factory worker whose company closed because it could not compete with subsidized foreign operations and who now struggles to feed his family. There is the small business owner who took loans to expand anticipating the boom that was promised and who lost everything when that boom never came. These are not just numbers on a spreadsheet, these are your neighbors, your family members, your fellow citizens. When leaders sign bad deals and make empty promises, it is not the leaders who pay the price, it is ordinary people. And the worst part, many of these people still do not fully understand what happened to them. They blame themselves for their failures, when the truth is they were failed by a system that prioritized announcements over accountability. Malaysia's story is painful, but it contains lessons that every developing nation needs to hear before it is too late. First, never let desperation drive your decisions, because when you negotiate from weakness, you will always get bad terms. Second, always read the fine print, and hire independent experts who have no stake in the deal being signed. Third, demand concrete milestones with real penalties, because promises without consequences are just words. Fourth, protect your local businesses, because they are the foundation of your economy, not the foreign investors who will leave when better opportunities arise. Fifth, remember that the people making promises will not suffer if those promises are broken. Your citizens will. And finally, understand that you are probably not special to these investors, you are just another market to exploit. Does this sound cynical? Perhaps, but is it not better to be cynical and protected than hopeful and exploited? Malaysia learned these lessons the hard way. The question is, will other countries learn from Malaysia's pain, or will they repeat the same mistakes? So what happens now, and is there any hope for countries like Malaysia that have been burned by bad deals? The answer is yes, but only if real changes are made. Governments must build institutions that can evaluate deals independently without political pressure. Citizens must demand transparency and punish leaders who prioritize photo opportunities over real results. Media must ask hard questions even when everyone else is celebrating. And developing nations must work together to share information about investors who have broken promises elsewhere. But perhaps most importantly, we must change how we think about foreign investment. It is not automatically good, and it is not automatically bad. The details matter, the terms matter, the accountability mechanisms matter. Malaysia's shocking deal was not shocking because foreign investment is inherently dangerous. It was shocking because the safeguards that should have protected the nation were never put in place. The future does not have to repeat the past, but only if we choose to learn from it. Will we make that choice, or will another country become the next victim of a deal they never saw coming? So here we are at the end of this story, and I want you to take a moment to really think about what we have just uncovered together. Malaysia, a proud nation with decades of economic success, a country that built iconic towers, created entire industries, and lifted millions out of poverty, somehow found itself trapped in a deal that promised everything and delivered almost nothing. But here is what makes this story truly heartbreaking. It did not have to happen this way. Every single warning sign was there before the ink dried on those agreements. Experts raised concerns and they were ignored. Opposition voices asked questions and they were silenced. Ordinary citizens had doubts, but they were told to trust their leaders. And now, years later, those same citizens are paying the price for decisions they had no real say in making. But I do not want you to walk away from this video feeling hopeless, because that is not the point of telling this story. The point is to open your eyes to a pattern that repeats itself over and over again in countries around the world. A government desperate for good news. Foreign investors with polished presentations and big promises, celebrations and handshakes before any real work begins. And then slowly, painfully, the truth emerges that the deal was never designed to benefit the people, it was designed to benefit the people making the promises. Does this sound like something happening in your country right now? Are your leaders signing deals that sound too good to be true? Are they asking you to trust them while refusing to show you the details? Because if that is happening, you need to start asking questions before it is too late. You see, the real villain in Malaysia's story is not any single person or a company. The real villain is a system that rewards announcements over results, that celebrates signatures over outcomes, and that allows leaders to make promises they will never be held accountable for keeping. Until we fix that system, until we demand transparency, accountability, and real consequences for broken promises, stories like Malaysia's will keep happening. The next victim might be Indonesia or Nigeria or Bangladesh, or maybe even your own country. The playbook is the same, only the names and the locations change. Now I want to hear from you, because this conversation should not end when this video does. Have you seen similar deals in your country? Are your leaders making promises that feel too good to be true? What do you think developing nations should do to protect themselves from being exploited? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I genuinely want to know what you think. And if this video opened your eyes to something you had not considered before, do me a favor and share it with someone who needs to see it. Share it with someone who still believes that every foreign investment is automatically good news. Share it with someone who thinks their government would never make a bad deal. And if you want to understand more about how these patterns work, how powerful interests exploit developing nations, and what we can do about it, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Because I am going to keep telling these stories, I am going to keep exposing these deals, and I am going to keep asking the questions that mainstream media is too afraid to ask. Next week I have another story for you, one that is even more shocking than what we covered today, so make sure you do not miss it. Let me leave you with one final thought. Malaysia did not see this deal coming because they were looking at the wrong things. They counted the zeros in the investment figures while ignoring the exit clauses. They celebrated the job numbers while ignoring who those jobs were really for. They trusted the handshakes while ignoring the track record of broken promises. And by the time they realized what had happened, the damage was already done. So ask yourself this question right now. What is your country not seeing? What deal is being celebrated today that will become tomorrow's regret? What promises are being made that will never be kept? Because if you are not asking these questions, nobody will ask them for you. The shocking deal Malaysia did not see coming was not actually shocking at all. It was predictable, it was preventable, and it was part of a pattern as old as international business itself. The only question that matters now is this: will you learn from Malaysia's mistake, or will you wait until it is your turn to wonder what went wrong? Thank you for watching until the end. Thank you for caring about these issues. And thank you for being the kind of person who wants to understand how the world really works, not just how powerful people want you to think it works. I will see you in the next video. Stay informed, stay skeptical, and never stop asking questions.